Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for the first lecture for this week. I hope all of you are doing well. Please note that the self-introductions assignment is up. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. Feel free to text me or send me an email. But pretty self-explanatory. Just want to get to know who you are and what your interest is in the class, possible picture, some background on yourself, and then, of course, responding to one of your classmates, to get the dialogue started. If you have any trouble with it, feel free to reach out. Always happy to help. So, what I wanted to cover today is the first part of our course. Remember, we are looking at American history. And while, as we shall see in this lecture, American history seems to sometimes begin with those individuals who like to selectively decide what is American history. I am going to actually be presenting to you a far more accurate, robust, and broader perspective of American history, namely discussing the history that has come before 1609, right? If many people think that American history seems to begin with Plymouth Rock, or if it begins with the Declaration of Independence or the US Constitution, well, to do that, negates literally thousands of years of history of people on this continent that would eventually take on the name of the United States of America. But prior to the arrival of Western Europeans, there were people here. It wasn't just, small villages or Native American tribes, as likes to often be portrayed in popular culture, whether it is films or social media. But the fact of the matter is that there was hundreds of millions of people here prior to the arrival of Europeans. There were flourishing societies, incredible empires that not only had achieved incredible feats in terms of government, social and political organizations, science, mathematics, and agriculture, but also have an extreme and deep rooted history in understanding themselves as people, their role in terms of their relationship with the earth, with the cosmos, all of that. And so, I want to give you all a much more accurate picture of of what American history is. And so that really requires us to discuss the people and the societies that were present well before Europeans arrived and how this eventual nation would be called America, because the achievements of these societies and these peoples have contributed to the success of this nation. And to not recognize their contributions would be to do a disservice, would to provide an inaccurate, if not incomplete, portrayal of American history. So, let's go ahead and let's get started. So for this week, we're going to be looking at a couple things because I'm going to be giving you guys several different lectures. But we're going to be looking at the civilizations and their cultures that flourished prior to the arrival of Europeans. We'll be looking at some of the archaeological evidence, like this piece that is behind me. That is me, yours truly, standing in front of the Temple of the Moon, which is outside of Mexico City at a archaeological site known as Teotihuacan. We will actually see it featured in a video shortly. But it is very important for us to understand that, while there is this narrative that somehow when Europeans arrived here, this was some sort of pristine wilderness that was bereft of any sort of human existence, that is just absolutely, completely inaccurate and false. There were people here. There was actually probably somewhere in the range of between 60 and 100 million people are the estimates prior to the arrival of Europeans. There were massive structures, as you can see, like the one behind me, throughout both the continents of North and South America. And so in order for us to give, an accurate picture of what was here prior to the arrival of Europeans and what was here when the Europeans arrived, we have to discuss this. So we're going to be looking at the archaeological evidence, of the people in the Americas. We're also going to look at the contributions that Native American people have made, not just in their own respective cultures, but into the broader, culture in terms of the United States as well as around the world. Their contributions, especially in particular with agriculture, and then we're also going to what I want you to walk away with in this section is to be able to critique that narrative of, the role that Native Americans have played in American culture. Because I'm sure that I could ask many of you, and it would be very surprising to me if you were to answer into the affirmative, can you tell me where Native American culture shows up in American culture? Right? And many people would probably be like, I don't know, Hollywood films, Cowboys and Indians, Dances with Wolves, something like that. And that's not surprising, right? And that's not necessarily, it has not always necessarily been intentional to erase the contributions of Native Americans to American society, but it has been certainly the consequence of the treatment, interactions, and dealings that Europeans have had with the people who were here when they arrived in 1492. So that long history, that long lineage, that residualism that has happened over the course of the historical record has resulted in the fact that our memories, our storytelling, our understanding of American history has been largely left incomplete because there is an entire section that many of us do not know about. And that's not surprising, right? If you took a American history class, you probably didn't engage much with Native Americans. Probably maybe you'd heard about them with under Andrew Jackson in the under his presidency and Indian removal, maybe Trail of Tears, Westward Migration, right? Manifest Destiny, maybe the Indian boarding schools, right? Well, that is something that we will be talking about, but I want to talk about prior to the arrival, right? Because that's very much a distinct part of, Native American history, but that's a history that takes place in the 19th century, the 20th century. Like, I want to talk about what was going on in the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th century as a way to try to understand how the contributions of Native Americans have largely been overlooked, but were nonetheless present when Europeans arrived. Okay, so let's take a look. And as we go forward, just think about what you want to be able to have is you want to be able to understand the narrative, have a much more complete and accurate understanding of the contributions of Native Americans, and be able to, commit to, understanding and exploring and critiquing why certain stories go, untold, or why don't they make it into the narrative, right? I think it's really important for all of you to recognize, history is, is always the search for additional stories to expand the narrative, right? But there is power in keeping a narrative narrow, right? Because if you want to focus on a certain group, if you want to have a story, you want to have a hero, you want to have a purpose, right? Especially when you may want to justify your own position in society, um, you certainly sometimes like to remove certain aspects from the historical record in terms of that collective memory. And the one way we do that is to stop telling the stories, to stop telling the narratives, right? But what we're going to do for this class is present those to you, not just so that you know, but so that you can continue to remain curious and be able to share that information going forward. So, couple of questions, but these are the essential questions that that we were already thinking about in terms of like the narrative. Where exactly do Native Americans show up in the historical and cultural narrative of the United States? And then, what is the legacy? The legacy of Native Americans in terms of their culture, contributions, their their presence in American society. Okay, so let's watch a short video. And this is from former Senator Rick Santorum. And I want you to hear what he is saying in terms of Native American culture.
If you think about this country, I don't know of any other country in the world that was settled predominantly by people who were coming to practice their faith. They came here because they were not allowed to practice their particular faith in their own country. And so they came here mostly from Europe, and they set up a country that was based on Judeo-Christian principles. I say Judeo-Christian, the Mosaic laws, 10 Commandments, and the teachings of Jesus Christ, the morals and teachings of Jesus Christ. That's what our founding documents are based on. It's in our DNA. You know, if you think of other countries like Italy and Greece and China and Turkey and places like that, they've all sort of changed over time. I mean, they've been there for millennia in many cases, and their culture has sort of evolved over time. But not us. We came here and created a blank slate. We birthed a nation from nothing. I mean, there's nothing here. I mean, yes, we have Native Americans, but candidly, that there isn't much Native American culture in American culture. It was born of the people who came here pursuing religious liberty to practice their faith, to live as they ought to live, and have the freedom to do so. Religious liberty.
Okay. So there's a whole lot there that that Rick Santorum, while he is being, as you can tell from just the way that he sets up his position in terms of his argument, he's very selective, right? He chooses to begin with American history with literally the settlement by Europeans in terms of these colonial settlements. Well, he is largely referencing what was going on in the 17th century. Okay. Hate to give Rex Santorum, as well as the rest of these individuals who may follow this similar ideology in terms of American history, but people, your Western Europeans, were here since 1492. Okay, that's their arrival. And we actually have evidence that there were Europeans here even earlier. If you want to look at the role of, the Vikings that landed in parts of Nova Scotia and in Newfoundland, as well as parts of Maine, right? There is even strong evidence that that individuals from Western Africa made it to various parts of the Caribbean. There was even arguments as well as evidence that China had made it onto the west coast of the United States. So, putting all that aside, the narrative that, as you can see, that Rick Santorum is trying to ascertain is really built on this idea that there is something unique about the people who arrived here and what they built. And, as he's very clear, they did it on their own. Okay? They came here for religious freedom, liberty, to build a continent off of Judeo-Christian laws, and that's it. And over the last 250 years, if we to use our founding documents, we, according to him, we haven't changed. Okay. Now, there's a whole lot that is, not just factually incorrect, but it is historically inaccurate as well as short-sighted in terms of that historical narrative. Because as he points out, yeah, there were Native Americans here, but there's not a lot of Native American culture in American culture. Well, I wonder why. That's the reason why he sees it like that, because he has never been told of the contributions that Native Americans have made. But what I'm going to do is I want you to think about how Rick Santorum and his, bumbling perspective is very much indicative and representative of how many Americans might think about Native Americans, which is frankly, they don't. And if they do, they probably share something that is parallel to what Rick Santorum is thinking. That, well, what contributions? What are we talking about? Well, let me help expand you on that. Okay? So when we think about his narrative, when we think about Native Americans, think about where our information and how it's being informed, right? Where do we get the narrative and the ideas about Native Americans, right? Usually it's going to come from popular culture, it'll come from social media, it'll come from film or television or something like that, right? And that we should always be very critical of because if we're getting it from something that's an entertainment or something that's meant to click or for us to scroll, and it's not something that necessarily we're pulling out of a text or we're getting it from a source such as somebody who has studied this their entire life, we have to be very, very critical of that, right? It is not unusual for us to be able to associate Native American culture with that of something of barbarism, that of something of savagery, that of something of people who are backwards or are just unlike those people that Rick Santorum points out arrived here with the intention to live under God's laws and create, a shining city on the hill. Well, that narrative that Rick Santorum has is going to be something that we're going to constantly see throughout this period that we cover in this course. That there is often this sense to create a narrative that somehow deludes the fact that there were contributing groups, people, and societies to this American project and that in order to justify the mistreatment of those groups that have contributed and have made a difference in the American, system, experiment, what have you, that we must dilute their contributions so that we can therefore justify the positions of power that many people have assumed for themselves as a way to say, this is why we're on top. This is why you don't get this opportunity to take away your land, to take away your right to vote, to take away your home, to take away your people, right? All of those sort of things. So I want you to really think about, this idea of how that narrative comes about and what exactly influences it, and even critique yourself. Like, if I really thought about it, it's like, okay, well, is there, what is informing me about Native American culture? Is it watching Apocalypto by Mel Gibson? I mean, that's like me equating, trying to understand, prehistoric history by watching the Flintstones, right? We have to be mindful of where we get our information and what is informing our knowledge, right? So the purpose, remember, of this course is to expand that. Let's try to get that out there. So we've got Rick Santorum's idea, but let me give you some other ones and give you some perspectives about Native American culture. Okay? Let's try to, expand these narratives. And we're going to be able to look at it in various ways. Now, many of you may know about how Native Americans or how people came to this continent, right? You've heard of it. There's an ice age, the Bering Strait, which connects basically present day Alaska with Russia, was frozen. People from Asia cross the continent, cross the ice, following the game herds, and go all the way down into, North and South America. Okay. You've heard this narrative. Well, guess what? You're going to hear it again.
For decades, textbooks presented only one view. Around 11,000 BC, during the Ice Age, big game hunters cross a frozen land bridge from Asia into Alaska, a region known as Thuringia. After the ice melts, they migrate down into the virgin territory of North and South America, hunting mammoths, giant sloths, and caribou with finely fashioned stone spear points.
Okay. So that's the narrative. 11,000 years ago, you basically have these hunter-gatherers who are following the herds across the ice. They follow them all the way into North America, and eventually they people South America. Okay. That's what we have traditionally been, told. Now, new evidence in terms of archaeological evidence that has been found in the deep jungles of the Amazon is calling into question this theory. All right. So let's take a look at it.
The remains we found and dated in the cave show that people were living deep in the Amazon forest at 13,000 years ago. This is some of the earliest art in the world, and it's definitely, so far, the earliest art in the hemisphere. Thousands of years before the Romans or Greeks, 8,000 years before the Egyptians, at least 13,000 years ago, people arrived in the Amazon. And their stone tools and paintings reveal these first Americans are not only mammoth hunters, they are foragers, fishermen, artists, and perhaps scientists.
Okay. So what we want to think about is that, okay, so not 11,000 years ago, but even earlier, 13,000 years ago. So another 2,000 years earlier, peoples that are moving and migrating out of Asia are actually crossing over and are making it all the way down into the Amazon. So that means that there were people that had gotten here, and we actually see that there's evidence that maybe individuals didn't necessarily just cross over in terms of the ice, right? There's new evidence that people actually may have made it via boat, meaning that taking their small paddle boats and going from the coasts in terms of Eastern Asia all the way down, following the ice, down through the Alaska area, possibly down through areas of like present day Washington, Seattle, Portland, California, all the way down into the coast of Mexico. How do we know this? Well, we have a couple of facts that we have that have been discovered by archaeologists. So one of these are the actual boats themselves. We notice that the boats used by native people along the coast of the Western United States are almost exact replicas for the types of boats that exist over in various indigenous populations in Asia, Papua New Guinea, the areas of New Zealand, etc. Another example is going to be the fishing techniques. The fishing techniques of these same groups mirror each other, okay? And it is not impossible to think that individuals are traveling, along one coast and down the other. Think of it like this. It's not that somebody just sits in the boat and spends, 2 days paddling. They paddle, 5 miles, camp, stay a little while, paddle a little bit longer, right? This is a process that people go through, right? They eventually get down there. It's not like us getting in our cars and be like, oh, I'm going to drive from, Baltimore to Miami and I'm just going to be there in, 12 hours. No, it's not that. Is that I want to think about how people are getting there. But the archaeological evidence is showing that these individuals aren't just following animals, they're actually following stars. They're actually following patterns in terms of weather. They're following patterns in terms of like fisheries and mammals and other examples like that to allow them to survive. Individuals that are able to follow various patterns in the environment, that means that they are taking note, making judgments, as well as evaluations of their environment. That means that these individuals have a certain cognitive ability to be able to understand and make reasonable discernments between the right time to travel, the wrong time to travel, when game is available, when it's not, when the weather's good, when it's not, right? These aren't just random savages that are just following the herd, right? These are individuals who are actually planning. And if they're planning, that denotes some sort of reflective ability in terms of their own sense of self, their status, as well as their conscientiousness in terms of how to survive. Okay. So that whole savage, critique that is often labeled on Native Americans, completely inaccurate, right? Completely inaccurate. All right. So let's keep going. So as we look at the contributions of Native Americans, because our friend, Rick Santorum, was so quick to recognize that Native Americans haven't contributed anything. But as I'm going to show you, they've contributed quite a bit to not just the United States, but to the world. There are three areas that we're going to be looking at: politics and government, economics, science and technology. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's take a look. So I'm going to start here with the Haudenosaunee. This is a group you've also probably heard of them, maybe known as the Iroquois. Maybe you've heard of the Iroquois League. Okay, these groups, known as the Five Nations, are located in upstate New York, present-day upstate New York. These groups, known as the Oneida, the Cayuga, the Mohawk, the Seneca, and the Onondaga, these are groups that have a long history of interacting with each other, trading with each other, intermarrying, going to wars, conflicts, etc., etc. Okay, so we have a groups that are here prior to the arrival of Europeans. They have a society, they have various organizations, but let me point out to something to you in terms of the role of government. Okay, so I'm just going to do an escape thing here and let me go back to this one. Yes. Okay. Here we go. Haudenosaunee.
Horn will build a democracy.
Oops. Let me go back a little bit for you. Back up. There we go. All right.
Horn has the power to build a kingdom for the Maya. For the Haudenosaunee, Horn will build a democracy. The inspiration is an ancient farming method called Joheko, or the Three Sisters.
Our three sisters, the corn, beans, and the squash, are all meant to grow together to help each other out.
Planted together, the Three Sisters are a farming miracle. Corn strips soil of nitrogen, but bean roots balance this by replenishing nitrogen. And the broad prickly leaves of the squash plant reduce weeds and deter pests. When consumed together, corn, beans, and squash provide all the essential nutrients for a healthy diet. The Three Sisters is a model for community organizing.
In our communities, you need people that can stand tall, like the corn, and they need people to assist and hold them up, like the beans. And then you have your squash that's laying down to protect everything. It's something that's opening our eyes to see what our ancestors was trying to show us.
The Haudenosaunee adopt the Three Sisters cooperative approach in nature to a cooperative approach in governance. This principle is expressed in the structure that defines their very identity. The Longhouse. Pete Jemison is an elder from the Seneca people.
The Haudenosaunee, what that translates to is that our people built an extended house. And when we're talking about this house that they built, it's not just the longhouse that we actually live in. It is the idea that each of the nations take up the issues that are confronting the community, and they try to come up with solutions.
Leaders from the warring tribes come together in a longhouse and form the Grand Council of Chiefs. It is America's first democratic legislature. Inspired by Hiawatha the Peacemaker, the council votes to end war among their nations.
Hiawatha no Haudenosaunee to hunja taroro ke nero di enersu. Onio de aga kayo haga kanyo ke haga ta naso din duane aga. Kanagara sarat suwahi guini ne sabadi ni buhra gui nuni ta muskat hati tayo. Nektis kanagara sara yate honatunda atuma hunja tara onenda ke haga. Onda mayo wata yo honorota se nerungwe sagorio sagoya ugun a. Rot kunzerakso tadutar. He was a sorcerer.
He had supernatural powers. He could communicate with birds and rattlesnakes and wolves and the animal world, and they would help him. He was a mean, mean man. His name was Tarudahu.
To convince Tadadaho to join the new Confederacy, Hiawatha and the Peacemaker seek a powerful ally. A woman named Jagonsase.
Jigagonsase was the first clan mother. She helped bring peace to the Iroquois, to the Haudenosaunee.
Virginia Abrams is a clan mother, a title first established by Jagonsase. Like Palenque's King Pakal, Jagonssase's influence comes from corn.
When the nations were warring against each other, she would take them in and feed them. And she kind of kept the war going on. So the peacemaker came to her and asked her to refrain from keeping this warring going on between our people.
Jagonssase's stockpile of corn perpetuates the bloodshed by feeding the warriors. The peacemaker strikes a deal with her. If she can stop the war, she can choose the chiefs.
Jigonsase wakumadia daniandago ohnire sumaran quiseraque. Oneki wahaguini hardy hoyena nescona. Jigonsase watuana gararna. Tira di hondo ne agueguro di enersu tiruna jataro, o hondo watumataste.
Jagonssases transforms Tadadaho's mind and he abandons war. Because of Jagonssases, clan mothers hold the power to appoint or dismiss chiefs.
She earned for our women the rights, the responsibilities, and the privileges that they have until this day.
And Tadadaho, in exchange for accepting peace, is appointed the keeper of the central fire and chief of chiefs, the most powerful leader. His name becomes a title that is handed down to this day.
Our longhouses come together. That our fire is talking about.
Sid Hill is now Tadadaho. He sees an important lesson in memorializing the name of this once vicious warlord.
People can change with help if they're going on the wrong path. There's always hopes to people helping them and showing them there's better things you can do with your life than being destructive and evil and negative.
With the final obstacle overcome, the peacemaker assembles representatives of each nation.
Sadia tatsuro di enersu da hati hamen unigora. So din the one aga, ben wahaga, onenda ehaga, oniote aga, dan ganyu ehaga. Etonigirun shunita watati listaralu ni unigora sum anegaswanta aranyade.
From the time of the peacemaker to today, the tradition of making wampum belts lives on. A new generation is being entrusted with the story of democracy encoded in the Hiawatha Belt.
Your thoughts and energy, that's the strength of that belt.
One day you're going to get old, and then you're the one that's going to have to transmit all this knowledge, what it means to your grandkids.
At the beginning of the Confederacy, the peacemaker made the symbol. It's our connection to each other. When I hold this Hiawatha belt, what it means to me is that we're a united nation.
Under a total eclipse of the sun, the peacemaker holds the newly woven Hiawatha Belt, and with the nations gathered beneath a tree of peace, he speaks the law of peace for the first time.
Unda wano tatago nam hat wano esto nera tase goa. Ti jo suwe a kwe ko yung kwatari o stock mo yung guati. Luwe ang tito wano do tali to nera tase goa da no ton man tamay si wa kwari waye na nagaya na re goa. Ti wari ko wano ta si anta wat ka wai si yung kwatari yun ne wes ni yung chufin sa akin. Tapos ko ano ang ko hagay sinat na tawad na rin yung parang shumli.
The reading of the Great Law and the weaving of the Hiawatha Belt established the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. It's a form of government that doesn't rule people, but rather serves people. It's this principle that inspires Benjamin Franklin and other framers of the Constitution to create their own government of the people, by the people, and for the people. In 1988, the U.S. Senate passed a special resolution recognizing the influence of the Haudenosaunee democracy on the U.S. Constitution. The Council of Chiefs meeting in the Longhouse is similar to Congress. Taradaho parallels the presidency. And the clan mothers are like justices on the Supreme Court. They too serve for life, but have an additional power. Clan mothers can choose and impeach the chiefs. It is a three-branch system of government that looks strikingly familiar. "600 years before the United States, the Haudenosaunee independently established the first democracy in America.
Pretty cool, huh? So, as you can see, right? This is a group. I'm gonna pull up the slideshow again, okay? All of those areas, a system of democracy, 600 years before the United States is even an idea, right? Before Western Europeans bring their models and their histories and their ideas of government, we have Native Americans, the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois, in this instance, developing a system of government that strongly parallels the one that we have today. Right? And even in 1988, the United States Senate passes a resolution recognizing the contributions, right? So to the point being made that there is no Native American culture in American culture, well, Rick Santorum, that's not true. Look at it right here in terms of politics and government. Okay, let's go on to the next. So you see these areas in terms of the longhouse, so please take a look at that. Now let's take a look at science and technology. Okay. This area right up here, Teotihuacan, this is Cahokia, which is located in Arizona and New Mexico. And this calendar by the Mayans, what we want to think about are the major cities that have been achieved, prior to the arrival of Western Europeans. What I want you to think about is the level of exactness, the technical knowledge that must have been present as well as maintained in order for these cities to be achieved. We're going to talk about food in a second, but I want to talk about these cities in particular. So let me just press the escape button for some reason. There we go. And let me pull up one of the videos. Okay, here we go.
Great power. The sacred power of six directions is shared by many peoples across Native America. One of its purest expressions was recently discovered in a man-made cave near Mexico City. Here, almost 2,000 years ago, is the largest city in the Americas, Teotihuacan. Population 125,000. The name of its builders is lost to history, but it would take more than 1,500 years for a U.S. city, New York, to surpass its population. Its biggest pyramid is one of the largest in the world, after Egypt's Great Pyramids of Giza. Yet archaeologist Sergio Gomez is more interested in what lies underground, a previously unknown man-made cave.
In almost every Mesoamerican culture, caves have a deep significance in cosmological thought. That is why this discovery is so important.
In 2003, a monsoon rainstorm created a sinkhole near a pyramid known as the Temple of the Feathered Serpent.
The entrance to the tunnel is located under the white tent at a depth of 14 meters.
Sergio was the first to rappel down the sinkhole. It led to a tunnel carved 2,000 years ago. Inside, he found artifacts brought here from vast distances, just like at Chaco.
El rayo, este es el rayo. Hay huesos de animal, probablemente un ave. Esta es una de las miles de piezas de objetos que hemos descubierto.
This is one of the thousands of pieces of artifacts that we've discovered in the interior of the tunnel. It's a representation of the principal deity of both the underworld and the celestial region.
Sergio believes many of the offerings symbolize heaven and earth and are carefully positioned in the tunnel.
We
believe that the placement of each object throughout the tunnel had a particular meaning. They were not just placed there randomly.
The tunnel ends in a human-made cave. Its floor is sculpted to represent the underworld. Its ceiling is covered in artificial starlight, mimicking the cosmos.
The entire tunnel was originally covered in a dust of shiny metallic mineral. They covered the walls and ceiling of the tunnel, so it's as if you were seeing the sky and the stars twinkling.
In this cosmic sanctuary of stars, Sergio finds two stone figures, statues that depict the first man and woman in the city's origin story. Sergio laser scans the tunnel. It descends 50 feet underground, extends for 340 feet, and ends directly beneath the pyramid of the Feathered Serpent. Here, the Teotihuacanos place the founding couple within 16 inches of the exact center of the pyramid.
I want you to think about that. Within 16 inches of the exact center. No electricity, right? No fancy tools or anything like that. So, I mean, we're talking about individuals who are able to track their movement and have the exact, almost the precise center of their massive pyramid, and to place these two figurines right underneath it. Savages, incoherent, individuals, barbarians. Barbarians don't have that sense of exactness, right? Nor would they even care to be that exact, to paint a cave to mirror the cosmos of what they see above them, right? That's detail. That shows sentiment. That shows intention, right? With that level of thinking, that is very sophisticated.
Estamos ubicados exactamente.
We are positioned exactly under the intersection of the north-south axis and east-west axis.
Arriba.
And above us is the peak, the central point of the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, right in this spot.
Yo pienso que aquí
They believed there was a conduit that connected this region from the underworld to the celestial region.
The builders went to extreme lengths using precise math and masterful engineering to align their sanctuary of stars to the six directions. Just like the Kiva builders at Chaco, the early Mesoamericans share a belief that the six directions represent finding balance in the universe. It is a quest to find the center between the world below and the one above, between caves and the cosmos.
del suroeste de los Estados Unidos.
In the southwestern United States, including Central America and South America, there are a series of ideas that form a general concept of the cosmos.
He escuchado y he leído alguna serie de
I've heard and read of the ideas the Hopi have about the cosmos and how the universe was created.
el cosmos, el universo. Y esas ideas son muy compartidas.
These ideas are shared throughout many indigenous communities, including indigenous communities in Mexico today.
Teotihuacan is part of something bigger going on across the Americas. The Maya, Aztec, and Inca all build monumental cities aligned to compass directions with an eye to the worlds above and below. And at Chaco, the builders extend the science of six directions to apply not only to place, but also to time.
Alignment was very important to these people at Chaco. It helped them to determine the times of year, the cycles of their crops, when they plant certain seeds. And it also determines the months, the moons, when the certain ceremonies happen.
At the very center of Chaco, builders create a sacred space to unify time and place, Pueblo Bonito. It is the largest of the city's 12 great houses, with over 800 rooms and 30 ceremonial kivas.
We can talk about this as a building. We can talk about it as a storage unit and a ceremonial center. And we can also talk about it as a clock.
Park ranger G.B. Cornucopia came to Chaco to study the stars 30 years ago and never left. To G.B., Pueblo Bonito and the sky are intricately linked. The great house is aligned to the six directions. One wall runs east-west and another north-south. Each day, as the sun gets higher in the sky, its shadow creeps closer to the north wall.
Here we can see the shadow is almost gone. And in just a few moments, it will disappear. There. This is solar noon, when the sun is at its highest point in the sky.
Pueblo Bonito is a clock that tracks the sun during the day. It's also a calendar that tracks it during the year. Every day, the sun sets in a different place on the horizon. The solar year starts on the winter solstice, when it sets in the south. On the summer solstice, it sets in the north. The 2 days halfway in between them are called equinoxes. And today, on the fall equinox, the sun lines up with the east-west wall.
we're between the two extremes. When it's really hot in the summer, summer solstice, and when it's really cold in the winter, winter solstice. We're at that midway point.
The north wall tracks the day. The west wall tracks the year. Built to the 6 directions, Pueblo Benito unites place and time.
People tell time by their relationship with the sky. Now, most of us have forgotten that because we have devices that represent time. We've got watches and calendars and clocks. But if you've got good markers on your horizon, you can predict the seasons so that you can prepare for ceremonies, agriculture, all manner of things.
The people of Chaco look to the sky.
Okay. So as you can see with this area in terms of technology, you can see that how sophisticated the societies of the people who built Teotihuacan, the people who built Chaco at Pueblo Benito, or any of the other numerous societies, you can see how sophisticated these people are. That they are using their buildings not just for protection from the elements, they're using it to track the time of day, the months of the year, the seasons, when to plant, when to harvest, when to travel, right? All of these things. This means that this society is highly organized and that it is not just a bunch of ragtag people that are running around bare ass, looking for their next meal, but instead highly sophisticated, highly organized, specific roles and duties with the intention of creating a society that is